ground that I think many of us experience, that is a framework for pathways discussion. We're all involved with our own strategic priorities. Whether your institution is struggling with it or not, as an entity, community colleges are typically struggling with declining enrollments and decreasing budgets, and yet our internal pressures and the student demands are increasing exponentially, as you know. And like all of you, I'm sure, every institution is just dealing with initiative fatigue. So there are so many other things that I think we all share that are context for how we need to think differently and how can we step out of, if you will, all of that stuff and begin to think differently about what we need to do in terms of redesigning community colleges and rethinking our future from the student's point of view. Certainly each have your own story, but and your data will tell you some things about your own student success with your graduation rates and your transfer rates, certainly with your retention rates, and you all have a story to tell, and we want to make sure that development of pathways plays a part in improving that story as a result of this work that you've invested in. In terms of what students tell us, certainly they've told us that they want fewer and more structured options. We wrote, I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to co-author a series of articles that was published in Community College Journal with Kay McClinney. And as part of that work, we talked a lot about what they've learned, particularly from the Community College Center for Community College Student Engagement. We've looked at the research work done by Office of Community College Research and Leadership at University of Illinois. We certainly looked at CCRC's work, and the messages are consistent. While we are sharing a couple of quotes with you and some information with you from those particular articles, the research background on pathways is very consistent. And certainly students want fewer and more structured options, as Scott Clayton told us, not a shapeless river on a dark night or brain freeze. I was one of those students, as perhaps many of you have been, or certainly many of your students are. We're overwhelmed, underprepared for making the choices that we have to make when we come to the community college venue, and yet we have to deal with those choices and deal with choices around things that as institutions we're actually pretty proud of. We're proud of our proliferation of programs. We're proud of a 2,000 course library. We're proud of a lot of things that are very focused on offering the breadth of opportunity for students that we can offer, but often the students experience that in such a dramatically different way than the way we see it as institutions. So we want to make sure that we're talking about what students experience and dealing with this from the student point of view, and certainly you're going to hear that again and again as we talk through some of our conversation about pathways today. Students told us that about 79% of them said they want to complete a degree, for example, and yet fewer than half meet that goal within 6 years. While so many students say that academic advising and planning is very important to them, so much very important to them, the reality of how students access advising and the impact on their decision making and their choice of a pathway to pursue or a program of study to pursue is often not in concert with what they say that they need and what they want. And so we want to make sure that as institutions we're ensuring that students are able to make the best choices possible. And based on what students tell us then, we know what our own story can be, and these are the kinds of pieces of information that as you think about the context, as you think about what your story is, how do you then translate that into the student experience and a redesign of the student experience? These are pieces of data that are very familiar to all of you. I know that as an Achieving the Dream institution, you're compelled to answer to those pieces of data and to provide planning that is in response to that. We believe that Pathways is certainly an answer to help us with increasing these rates and ensuring that the student success agenda is our primary agenda. So let's talk just for a moment about what pathways are not. They are not only programs of study or mere course sequences. That's one of the things that, from our point of view, we often think about that. I know as an academic leader in my own institution, it's easy to just think so concentrated, in such a concentrated way about the actual program of study. And certainly many of our faculty, as we've asked them for responses on a variety of things, they think primarily about the sequencing of courses, the actual program of study, how that's delivered. And so we want to stretch you a little bit beyond that. Again, think about the larger context from the student, the way students experience learning. It's not just coming in, taking a sequence of courses, and walking out the door. It entails so much more, and particularly within the context of student success and what we know about high impact practices, there's so many other pieces to that pathway pursuit that we want to make sure that our students are experiencing. So if we could talk about what pathways are. Pathways, in the article, Dr. McClenny defined them as a framework that moves us from current practices to fewer options and more and differently structured approaches to getting students from their point of entry to their goal. And what I, as your pathway coach, want to propose to you is that this conversation about pathways really is that. It's moving from just random practices to a more holistic approach, one that emanates from the learner's point of view and moving from learning communities, student success courses, technology-supported advising, supplemental instruction, project-based learning to real scalable, high-impact practices that impact the largest number of students with the greatest potential for positive impact on students, and looking at that in the most holistic way possible. More specifically, in relation to this grant, the definition was provided to you that pathways are a set of stackable credentials that lead to middle skills careers in retail and offer students multiple entry and exit points to assist them in moving to the next level in their careers. And that next level can include higher level positions as well as earning associate and bachelor's degrees. These are compatible definitions, and if you've had a chance to look at the guide to implementation, you've seen a lot of alignment, and we believe that these are things that are both in line with what you as an institution are trying to strive toward, in line with what you as an Achieving the Dream institution are trying to strive toward, and also in line with what the Retail Pathways Initiative is trying to focus on for the future, for the next 18 months. I want to talk briefly about why pathways. In the research work that's been done by the Center for Community College Student Engagement, which has included over 900 colleges and over 2 million students, they keep telling us that we need to do a better job of some things. And collectively, we tried to analyze what the students have been telling us. And so one of those things is about aligning levels of learning. It's about the stackable credentials. It's about that piece of how the developmental experience leads into a program of study and preparedness for that, and how students move from one program of study to the next, and how students then continue along that learning continuum and ultimately reach their goal of either transfer to another institution or into the world of work. And so the pathway construct really is about how all of that aligns from the student perspective. And there are a variety of aspects around that, certainly as we take into consideration adult basic ed, some of the readiness factors that students have when they come to us, and how we integrate that into the learning experience for our students. And there's so much work and discussion around developmental ed and how that happens within a particular pathway construct. The idea of coalescing arts and sciences with career and technical education is not a new idea, but it's certainly one that hasn't lost any favor particularly in the retail world, I believe. We hear often from employers that if we have students who can read and write and think and communicate and strong interpersonal and intrapersonal skills and where they learn those in our curriculum is something that we need to continue to think about, whether our students are continuing on to another program of study or whether they're within the context of a career and technical program, or in this instance, a particular certificate program that's intentionally designed to lead them into a retail pathway career. Integrating student learning and support is a very dominant theme that requires us to think about how students enter and complete post-secondary credential, whether they transfer into employment or transfer into another program, the kind of assistance they receive in doing that through advising sessions, the variety of support efforts that we surround a student with, and they are many. I'm sure your own institution has a wide range of support, but how we ensure that students are really, truly intentionally integrating their learning experience with all of their other experiences, whether it's career advising and counseling, whether it's academic support, whatever that other support need is, how do we integrate that into the student experience in a very intentional way and make sure that all of our students are experiencing that. And certainly connecting classroom learning and applied learning. More and more we're learning that the classroom environment is being redefined, and how we redefine that for the future for our students, and what that begins to look like, and the kind of professional development that's going to be required for our faculty who are involved in delivering instruction, what that looks like in the future. Certainly that includes contextual teaching and learning, something that we've talked a great deal about and yet we don't do as well as we should, and there's a great deal of evidence that students still learn better in a contextual environment, a contextualized environment. So how we learn to help students in an applied environment is part of the redesign of any pathway, or at least a consideration for that. Merging curricular and co-curricular experiences is also essential to that. What do we require of students to do? And I know in the community college environment, about 80% of our students tell us that they really don't participate in co-curricular experiences, and yet we know how much that strengthens their learning. So how can we embed that in the retail pathway, and how can we do so? And then certainly bridging the credit and non-credit gap is continuing to be a real pivotal point in how we move students through the learning pipeline. If you have been part of discussions for credit for prior learning, and I know many of your institutions probably have provisions for that, certainly military experience, all of those kinds of things, that students come with a great variety of experiences. How can we keep them from being duplicative in their learning process and allowing them to draw on what they know and apply what they know in a credit type environment? The strategies for doing that are as multiple as the institutions represented in those efforts. So those are all key constructs of what students have told us in years and years, about a decade of research through the Center for Community College Student Engagement. These are the kinds of things that float to the surface as these are major reasons for why we need to redesign with the idea of academic pathways for students to pursue. Those should sound pretty familiar to you if you've had a chance yet to look at the guide to implementation that was sent to you on I believe on Monday or yesterday. We have turned those. It was
on Monday, Donna.
Okay.
It was on Monday. Mm-hmm.
We've taken those things that students have told us, and we have called those, for the purposes of this grant, essential elements of pathways. Those things are so critical to the learning context. In addition, we have added the transition to and retention in employment. Your evaluators are going to be very concerned about the retail pathway and what that begins to look like, and we certainly have that same concern with any of the pathways that we're talking about. And we hope that this retail pathway work will, in fact, enable you to scale pathways where it's applicable and appropriate for your institution to do so. So we'll need to know about transition to and retention of employment. about employer engagement. That's such a critical part of all of the redesign work, and something that was part of the request for proposal, and many of you have addressed strategies for increasing employer engagement, so we want to be able to include that in the essential elements of pathways, and also using data to improve outcomes. You're an Achieving the Dream institution, so I know that's a very familiar language to you, and Trudy is going to be a wonderful coach for you to help you determine what data need to be available, how, and your evaluators will help you in coming and setting up your evaluation work, so that we're working in sync as a team to both look at the larger context for pathways, but also look at the practical aspects of this grant. We want this to be both aspirational and practical. As your coach, I feel compelled to do that. I feel that it's our role as your coaches and as your support team to say, okay, this is about retail pathways, but this is also about so much more than just the retail pathway that our certificate program that we have in place. What is it that you want to do with pathways? What does your retail pathways work like, and what does that begin to look like more broadly? And how can we scale that up? This graphic is our best effort at taking a number of things that students have told us, taking the research literature on pathways, and I will tell you, at times putting the graphic together when we were doing the articles felt a little bit like spaghetti on the wall, but it's really our best effort to try to conceptualize as holistically as possible the broad range of things that we're talking about when we talk about pathways from the experience of students, and what all a pathway entails then in terms of the broadest perspective possible.
And Donna, may I just chime in? This is Meredith Hatch from Achieving the Dream, and I think this visual is really, really important in terms of displaying in a visual way what pathways really mean to achieving the dream, and also, each of you have provided a map of what the retail pathway looks like at your institution, and I think that this is really, again, a helpful visual for you to view and think about the way that we're conceptualizing pathways and strengthening pathways in this effort.
Thanks, Meredith. And I think as all of you saw when you were doing your proposals in response to the RFP, it's difficult to put together a visual model. So please don't think that this is the perfect model, but we tried as broadly as possible to represent all of the elements that we think are critical to the construct of pathways, and how we integrate all of those experiences from a student point of view, and then try to structure that in a way that makes some coherent sense to students as much as we possibly can. As you will see, I'll break it down in subsets for you, if you will. Hopefully that may help a little bit. If you look on the far left-hand side of the model, there's a collection of practices, many of which are considered high-impact practices, like orientation, for example. Strong intrusive student advising, those kinds of things are practices that are familiar to you. But the entering student experience and how students come through your front door, and how they then make a decision about selecting a particular pathway. And we've represented there in that second section, we've represented 5. One of those is other. In this context, I will tell you that probably the other is what would be the broader pathway construct for the particular retail pathway. In many institutions, your institution may have one pathway, it may have 5 pathways, it may have 12 or 15. Hopefully it's not considerably more than that, because it gets a little overwhelming to students if you're trying to narrow those choices for them. But certainly one of the pathways that many institutions have created is a business pathway, or something that's related to the overall business kind of function. So So imagine that this is for the business pathway, and then that then begins to bridge into what we talk about when we order our programs of study within that, when we order the developmental education experience or consider ESL or adult basic ed, when we move from that into stackable credentials and certificate programs and then on to an associate degree program. And then what is the broader student experience that really encompasses that program of study through applied learning, through integrated support like tutoring and study groups, those kinds of things. Any kind of supplemental instruction may be included in those. Again, a cadre of best practices that support students who are going through a particular program of study. And what are the linked co-curricular experiences, and how do you organize those? And certainly, many of you have probably implemented student success courses, but have you done so within a pathway? I know there's research that indicates that the student success course embedded within a particular pathway and contextualized has a great deal of impact on student success. And then, which will be pertinent to many of you, there's the notion of the navigator, the advisor, the student success coach within a particular pathway, and how that person or those people support students who are moving through the pathway and helps them transition all the way through the pathway, but then in addition into transfer into another program or another institution or directly into employment. And many of you have probably engaged retention coaches. So part of the conversation is, how do we look at all of this holistically? Because that is, the holistic picture is what we hope to have conversations with you about when we come to talk with you about your particular pathway and where the retail pathway is developing and how it connects to larger degree programs, how it connects to employment, how it connects to the entering student experience, and certainly how are there core curriculum elements that cross over some of those programs of study and what those need to look like. So as much as possible, it is our graphic representation of what we are talking to you about when we talk to you about pathways. Beyond the actual depiction of a pathway model, there are some principles that you need to consider as you're redesigning your retail pathway certificate and or other certificates and degree programs as well. What are your anchors? If you know, and I'll give you this example. When we started through developmental ed redesign, we had a number of workshops, and we had about 150 faculty in the room, and we had a lot of conversation and a lot of discussion about different things that needed to be done in math, in reading, in English, and sometimes they seemed at cross purposes. So we filtered out all of that discussion, and we came up with about 4 principles of redesign that we used as anchors to our work. And so whenever the discussion would come up, okay, are we contextualizing here? Is this the pathway, or is this the principle that we're focused on, or what is the principle that we're trying to do here? I'm going to suggest to you that the research tells us that there are some principles that are fundamental to redesign through pathways, some of which will be familiar to you, and some of which have a lot of best practices associated with them. Those include a strong start, certainly integrated support, high expectations and high support. The idea of intensive student engagement is essential. Pathways, not mere course sequences, we mentioned that earlier. Learning in context, some acceleration of student progress and trying to deal, if acceleration is one of your principles of redesign, it certainly makes it easier to go back and filter your work and say, this is what we decided on. We decided that acceleration was a real goal, and some of your proposals indicated that that's the case. So it may be that that's the principle you want to hang on to, and that will be your anchor and your filter for many of the efforts that you make around the redesign work. And certainly professional development is an essential principle of redesign, and as you consider your particular work, you may be selective. It may not be that all of these principles are going to be pertinent to the work that you do, but as you look broadly at pathways, we certainly would suggest that these are things that we would ask you to give some consideration to as you think about your college. And then just anticipating with you some of the challenges. We know what those challenges are. We have experienced them the same as you have. We know some of the limitations of the retail pathways and some of the challenges that are inherent in that work of dealing with the retail pathway. But what are the other considerations when you're looking at this? Are you addressing silos, certainly emerging roles of faculty and of staff? If you're looking at navigator roles and advisor roles, those are going to be different perhaps from a more traditional perspective of advising than what you've had in the past. And these are all things that you've experienced with your Achieving the Dream work, I'm sure. And cultural barriers and stigmas, professional development needs and structural barriers. These are sort of how to begin to think about the redesign work and certainly thinking as you anticipate your challenges. We did take a look at each of your proposals, and I think we can apply from your proposal anticipating some of the work that you're going to be focused on. While you may not have been thinking about this as broadly as we're proposing to you today, as your coach, it's my goal to urge you on to the broader perspective and to ensure that this work is valuable work to you, not just about the retail pathway, but about your institution and student success. So when we look at Umpqua and we look at some of the things that they discussed, what various pieces of the model reflect the essential elements that you want to focus on. So for example, at Umpqua, they're featuring some work on their curriculum to work on a 13-credit-hour certificate program, to better align their certificate program with an AAS in marketing. So they'll be working on the scheduling for the program and also on their cooperative work experience with students. They also indicated that they will be identifying competencies, creating contextualized courses, all part of the curriculum work that's associated with the development and the continuous improvement of the program of study. And additionally, they're going to be adding a part-time navigator. So you can see that each of those things are represented in the model. So while you may not have been thinking about it as broadly as that, I think certainly you're on a healthy road to what we would consider a fully blown pathway. Tallahassee has indicated it's going to focus on realignment of the certificate and degree programs in the pathway. They'll also be focusing on professional development to support the program and on course scheduling, part of the high-impact practices that support program development delivery. They'll be featuring linking co-curricular experiences through the development of a business incubator model as we understand their proposal. And each of these we may have a better understanding once we get your input from your response to the guide to implementation, but these are sort of the snapshots of what we saw in particular in your proposal. Similarly, Durham plans to focus on improving alignment of internal programs. They want to strengthen their external partnerships that support the program. They're focused on the addition of a student career navigator to support students in transitioning into and through the pathway. And they want to focus on career mapping and comprehensive career advising as well as the job placement support. So you can see those represented on the model, on the Pathways model. At Broward, they're focusing on strengthening their curriculum and strengthening business partnerships to provide students with real-world scenarios that enhance their career pathways learning experiences. So they'll be doing a lot of contextualization, it sounds as if. They're also looking at ways to create supports for students, such as childcare and transportation and housing options. So you get a snapshot there of some of the work, and hopefully you'll learn from each other, and we'll be able to share information from each of the sites as we continue the work of the development of the pathway and what that looks like. And as we continue to share that information, you will learn from each other and move on. I love West Wing. I am a big West Wing fan, and I like Jed Bartlett because at the end of every meeting he'd typically say, okay, what's next? He's ready to move on, and I hope that you all are ready to move on. I know you've had a lot thrown at you the last month or so, and we've tried to use this opportunity prior to the beginning of the fall semester to give us all a framework of reference for moving forward and talking about what's next for your college. As part of doing that, one of the things we asked you to do in response to the guide to implementation was to take a look at those essential elements and say, what are the primary features of your current or proposed retail pathway? And I'm going to ask you to kind of look back at the slides when those are shared with you from the webinar and say, did this really capture it? Make sure that we're on the right and same page in terms of where you start. And then we want to urge you to think about what essential elements you're going to be focused on over the grant period. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to have this framework conversation for you today about pathways. So you can envision what we're talking about when we talk about pathways. You can envision the work ahead, and you can begin to say, okay, this is really what we want to focus on, because 18 months in the life of an institution is not a very long time, and it's hard to get a lot of things done, particularly when you're short on resources, as everybody is, and short on time, and a lot of parameters around the grant. But we want to make sure that we're prepared to help you focus when we come, that our time is well spent for both the evaluating team and for Trudy and me when we come to talk with you, that we're providing you the kind of support that you need for that. So what challenges you anticipate is an important question for you to think about, and then what kind of technical support you think you might need during the course of the grant. So that's our request is for you to start thinking about what's next for your college and be ready for action. In terms of a few specific next steps, I know your next Retail Pathways webinar is August 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to ask you to return the responses to the guide to implementation by August 14th. Hopefully that will give you a window of time before we ramp up for fall and get really involved in fall activities. And we tried to keep the questions as straightforward as possible, but as thoughtful as possible to move you toward the kind of thoughtfulness that will help us make the most of our time when we come for our site visits this fall. And then the coaches will talk with each of the colleges individually during the week of August the 17th. We know that you were asked to provide a work plan for getting the work done for your Retail Pathways initiative, and part of the purpose of today's webinar was to share information with you that will help you refine that work plan and make any adjustments to that you would like to make, and make sure that you've communicated those to Achieving the Dream and to us. Additionally, then, we'll help you. We hope this will help you prepare for your site visits and your consultations with the evaluators in September and early October, and then also prepare for the site visits and consultations with Trudy and me when we come in October and November. And finally, here's our contact information. Please feel free to contact us by email. I put the references for the 3 articles in particular that tried to synthesize a lot of the research on pathways. Those were in 3 successive community college journals. So those references are there for you to access those from the community college, from the American Association of Community Colleges. So that information is available to you. And I'm happy to entertain any questions or any comments you might have, and appreciate your patience with me as I tried to go very quickly through a good bit of content.
So this is Meredith from Achieving the Dream, and I'm going to read a question while I open all of the lines. So we had a question about getting a copy of the PowerPoint, and so in terms of following up from today's webinar, Achieving the Dream will send out a copy of the PowerPoint as well as a link to the YouTube video, which is a recording of this webinar. I'm opening up all of the lines right now so we can take other questions. So if there are background noises, try to limit them. And I also noticed a question, or a comment really, about how does financial aid impact this model? So wondering, Donna, your perspective about that, and Kate, I'm working to open your line in case you have any additional comments about that. So again, the question is, how does financial aid impact this model? Donna? Oh, so I understand that Kate won't be able to read her question, but again, the question is specifically about financial aid impacting the model. Oh, one moment, please. I'm realizing that Donna is now muted. Okay, perfect. So Donna, you're unmuted now.
As we all know, financial aid is probably one of the trickiest things we have to deal with from the student experience. Certainly it's part of the entering student experience, but it impacts the student throughout the experience as well. The financial aid, I think financial aid is unfortunately slower to catch up with the Pathways model than from a federal regulation standpoint. There are institutions who have addressed barriers that financial aid has presented to some of the Pathways. Many of your institutions will share experiences as much as we can. We will certainly try to get expertise from the financial aid experts and bring you information for your institution. If you have specific barriers or challenges that you face, please let us know in advance so we can do what we can to try to address those when we do come. Please include.
Great. And Donna, another question. And comment from Stephen Gross. So specifically, there's a comment about feeling that core curriculum may not be necessary for a certificate in sales, and wanting to prepare cohorts to move forward in middle-level sales positions. What do you think?
One of the comments that was, I think, pretty apparent in the proposals was in terms of the alignment of the certificate program with an AAS degree program option. And when we've talked about this, certainly as we're looking at outcomes from an evaluator standpoint, and maybe Deb and John and Maggie might want to comment on this, but several of the institutions mentioned the fact that they want to embed or align their certificate program with either a marketing degree or some other of their degree programs to ensure that there is a pathway option for students who do want to go on. And one of, when you get back down to principles again, I will tell you something I'm very, very, very committed to believing about pathways is that often students who do find success within a particular structure, even though it's a short-term certificate, short-term structure, when they do find success, many of them will want to pursue another level of learning, and we want to make sure that those opportunities are available for them, which is part of the pathway construct. So the question then becomes, is there anything that would align, that we would consider core within that pathway? Maybe it's a basic marketing course, or maybe it's a basic sales course, or whatever the course may be, but there may have some there may be some applicability of that particular course within another different kind of program of study or an advanced program of study. So one of the questions will be, where do those courses align? What if anything, is considered core? So that students are not being redundant in their learning.
Thank you, Donna. And then a comment about specifically how evaluators are really going to be interested in understanding what the core curriculum means and understand how the curriculum prepares students for retail jobs, but also contributes, and this is important, to pathway progression. So this is, again, something that Deborah Bragg from the evaluation team is commenting about. The next question is relevant to your progress and the grant, and it's a question from Durham Tech about when will the announcement be made about the colleges that received this grant, so you could use that in your marketing and recruitment. And so Achieving the Dream is very, very interested in doing this soon. And so we will be in touch with some additional information, but we're hoping that you will be able to do this over the coming months, so within the month of August. I know that other colleges have asked this question as well, so I wanted to make sure to respond to it. Let's see. And your lines are open, so you may also speak questions that you might have or comments that you might have. I do want to make sure that you know that you can certainly announce that you are providing courses and that you are embarking on this work. But we do know that that formal announcement is important to you, and so we are working on making sure that we have that complete. Any other questions or comments from folks on the line? Okay. So then at this point, Donna, if you could just go backwards one slide again to the next step. Oh, one moment, actually. Darlene Bullock has another question.
Okay.
Darlene, what's your question? Your line is open. And Darlene, you're probably typing your question, so we'll be able to read that in a moment. And while that question is being typed in, I did want to reiterate that there's going to be a webinar August 12th at 2 p.m. So if you can hold that in your calendars, and we will be sending out registration information for that webinar shortly. We'll also be reaching out to your colleges about scheduling phone calls the week of August 17th. I do want to make sure that we're able to respond. Okay. Again, the webinar date is August 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Darlene, we certainly do want to make sure to respond to your question. And your line is open if you'd like to ask that. Okay. Okay. So Darlene, and this is an important point. So Darlene says the reason that she's asking about the announcement is because the fall semester starts in 2 weeks, as it does at many institutions, and are concerned about not being able to recruit. I do want to reiterate that you may certainly talk about this work and start recruitment for this programming. That does not need to happen after a formal announcement of the grant. So I just want to reiterate that. I know that it's important. And Achieving the Dream, again, will be working to have this formal announcement. Okay. Well, I thank you all for your attention today. Again, we will be sending out the slides as well as sending out a link to the webinar within the coming days, and we look forward to our continued work together. We'll talk with you all on August 12th, and in the meantime, completing that guide to implementation will be particularly helpful. So thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all very much.